Okay, another engine build. Another 400 small block. Just helping out someone I know. So this engine has been run before, but it's in really good shape. Everything checks out pretty good. And the crank is in good shape, but it is worn. It's stamped 001 on the rod and the mains. So that means that, and I had it polished, so it was in good shape, but it's worn 1/1000ths. So I got I tried some standard bearings just to see, and the clearances were too loose. So I got some 1/1000 undersides, which technically means that the bearings are actually 1/1000 thicker to accommodate for the wear on the crank to tighten up the clearances. So we're sitting pretty good, and just set the cap on here, the rear main. I got the seal in. I'm just gonna knock the crank back and forth and start torquing things down. So all stock hardware. So just good old engine oil for the lube. Grab my rubber mallet. So small block does have a dowel to line up the two halves, but you can get slightly a little bit out of it. So I always go back, we go forward, we go back. And the last, I always like drive the crank forward, because if it's a manual transmission or when the converter builds, well, you could say builds a little excess or whatever the case, it always wants to drive the crank forward. So we go back and forth, and that way we know our two halves, the upper, which technically is inside the block, and the lower, which is the cap, and we get a good flat surface. So we'll go and I'll go in a couple stages. I'll just get that held, just so it's just held. I'll do this one more time just to make sure. Get that so it's just held. We'll get out the old lie meter, see if we're in the wheelhouse. Grab the old line this up. Slam the old front main cap on here. Bing, 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 bing. Okay. front main cap. I've got give a little bit of lube. I won't get any dry starts. We got an arrow here, so make sure the arrow goes forward, pointing to the front of the block. Again, just good old engine oil. These are GM bolts. And seat the cap. And torque and stages, but that's just to get her now in the wheelhouse. Oh, get this dialed in. Tight. But I've got at least just over 4 thou on the needle there. And I've got a heavy lube in there, so I know it's going to take up a little bit. So okay. I'll continue on. And spins beautifully. Roll this over where it's easier to number 4. number 2. And 3. Okay. All in the right order. Obviously one you can't go wrong, but it could be aimed the wrong way. Arrows pointing forward, front of the block. 2, 3, 4, and obviously the main. So, I like to just start the bolt so I know that they're threading in. And I'll just seat the cap. There we go. Okay, torquing a couple pages. And the crank should spin smooth, which it does. It's just because I used the grease, but believe me, it's spinning super smooth. Now, if at any point you the crank doesn't spin freely, well, that's where you're stopping, and you got to figure out what's going on. Obviously, we'd have an issue with the either a bent crankshaft or possibly the line bore is completely out of whack, or who knows, right? But it'd be a good indication that there's obviously something wrong. So if the crank's not spinning free, that's where you get the big old stop. And again, beauty. Spins fantastic. Nice and free. So just doing this video, Brian will be watching for sure. He's going to be finishing off this build. I'm just starting on the bottom end. And yeah, so that's about it. So it's just our 30 over, it's 406. I can't even remember what vehicle it's going in. I'll have to talk to Brian again about that. But anyways, for bearing clearances, I checked them all dry. We're sitting right around that 3 thou, 3 thou, 3-1 if you want to call it. But and we're a little bit bigger on the back, on the rear main, which is okay. It's usually what you want anyways. So we'll yeah, continue on. Yeah, that's where we're at with that. So just a kind of a quicker, shorter one somewhat. That's it. So till next time, take it easy.